Hi everyone, today we're going to sketch this temple in Chiang Mai using an easy method for beginners of laying down the watercolor wash first and laying the pen on top. Today I'll be using micron pens in size 0.3 and 0.5, a small size 1 brush and a size 10 oval brush, spray bottle, palette of paints, palette for mixing, tissue paper and a jar of water. I am going to be sketching on Bahong 100% cotton paper, size 250 by 150 millimeter cold press. First I'm going to spray my watercolors with water to activate them, and then I'm going to moisten my cotton paper using the water spray bottle. I'm going to use a size 10 oval brush, but any watercolor brush will do. I'm going to start by mixing some quinacridone gold, and I'm going to start outlining the border of the temple. Today's watercolor is going to be a loose watercolor, and as such there's no sketching template provided, and we're going to start by laying the water directly onto the page without drawing any pencil lines as a setup. This method can be extremely intimidating for a beginner, but I encourage you not to be and just enjoy the fun of trying something new. This sketch is not about perfection by any means, and it's more about having fun and letting the sketch unravel as we go. For the short wall on either side of the steps, I'm going to mix up some buff titanium and then just lay that roughly in the area that I can see it. And then for the stairs, I'm going to mix a watery solution of a mixture of burgundy red ochre and burnt sienna and lay that down for the stairs. I want a bit more of an intense deeper red for the red on the actual temple, so I'm going to add some burnt sienna and Venetian red to the red mixture I've already got and add that in for the red parts of the temple. Wetting down the page before putting down your watercolor in this first stage is extremely important as well as helpful, because when we're laying down the watercolor like we are now, the page being wet really gives us a long time to think about what it is that we're doing and to not feel hurried as we lay the watercolor down. It's very easy when doing this method the first time to feel quite panicked and under time pressure, but if your paper is still wet, there's definitely no need to hurry. I'm just laying down some Serpentine Genuine for the grass in front of the temple, and then I'm using whatever colors are on my palette to fill in the pathway and the grass in front of that. The paper is starting to dry now, which is exactly what I want, and I'm going to go over the temple again and just drop in some dots of thicker consistency quinacridone gold to try and get a little bit of texture to the surface of the temple. So just have some fun with this. The paper is definitely slightly drier, so it doesn't blend as much, and I'm using a slightly thicker consistency of the paint so that the color intensifies in the areas that I lay it down now. Now I will do the same with the red and just dot in some red all over the surface of the temple. I find this method extremely relaxing and fun. There's really no pressure. I've chosen a subject that doesn't have deep perspective. Doesn't really matter if I don't get all of my proportions perfect. I'm just enjoying it and having fun as I go. I will do the sky just now, but I want the color to dry quite a bit because I don't really want the blue of the sky to bleed into the yellow of the temple, so I'm giving that time. So for now, I'm just adding a little bit of contrast with the darker red on the vertical slats on the temple window, as well as on the staircase. And lastly, I'll just add a bit more red in the shadow area under the eaves of the temple. Now it's time to paint the sky, and I'm going to prepare a solution of cobalt blue. And then I'm going to use a mop brush and just wet the area that I'm going to lay down for the sky again, but paying attention to not touch the yellow of the temple. I don't really want the colors to mix, and the sky area on my paper is already quite dry. So as soon as I've laid that water down, I'm going to drop in the cobalt blue. I will drop the blue in quite irregularly to give an impression of clouds in the sky. Now I'm going to move down and work on the area on either side of the temple. I just want to give an impression of foliage and trees, but nothing too definite. The lighter I lay down these colors, the more into the background the color will recede. So I'm paying attention to not make the color too intense. I will start with Serpentine Genuine, and then I will just work around my palette and drop in some medium to darker greens, whatever colors are on my palette. Now I'm going to work on the doorway, and to do that I'm going to use neutral tint. This is another area that I wanted to be almost completely dry before I put the much darker shadow color down, so that it didn't bleed too much into the rest of the sketch. And now, just before I call it a day on my first layer, I'm going to do one more pass with the quinacridone gold over some of the yellow areas on the temple. Now I'm going to let the whole thing dry completely before I come in and go over the top with ink. For the line work, I'm going to use a Micron liner pen size 0.3, and I'm going to start on the left hand side of the temple and start with a loose outline of the temple. As I work through, I'm working with a very light hand and a loose wrist to try and keep my lines as free and as loose as possible. I'm really not trying to get things exact, it is just a general impression. I will pull out my ruler though for areas where we might have an issue with perspective, specifically things like the circles on either side of the roof. I need to make sure that I get those on the same level on either side, because that's the sort of thing that will really make the sketch look lopsided if they aren't level. Likewise with the scoops on either side of the roof, I'm going to make sure that the points of each of those are also aligned. And so I will continue with the rest of the temple, filling it in bit by bit and using my ruler wherever I feel it necessary in order to get the perspective correct. But I'm definitely not using the ruler to get straight lines, only to be a guide as to where to put things for perspective. If you feel concerned that in sketching this without any guidelines that you might get the perspective incorrect, or that it might not look perfectly symmetrical, by all means you can feel free to put some pencil guidelines down on the paper before you start. But I have to say I've done this method numerous times, and every time that I put something down on the paper before I start always takes away some of the spontaneity of what I'm trying to do, and the results are never the same as if I go straight down onto a blank piece of paper. Now I'm going to move to a slightly thicker micron pen, size 0.5, and with this I'm going to do a little bit of shadow work. I will start by putting a shadow line on the edge of the eave. That will bring the eave forward and push the face of the temple backwards. Then when I consider where the light is coming from, I'm going to consider that it's coming from the top right. That means that on each of the square or rectangular insets on the front of the temple, that there will be a shadow on the top and on the right hand side of each block. Then I will add a shadow on the inside of the slatted windows, and then I'll add some shadow on the edge of each of the stairs. On the lighter cement area on either side of the stairs, I will also add in some shadow lines underneath a couple of the layers. And then I'll just add a little bit of detail work to the dragons. Now onto the fun part, and that is the shadow layer. I want to make a darker version of the reddish color that I've got, so I'm going to mix them up in a thickish consistency, but then I'm also going to add some neutral tint. That will automatically darken the shade but keep it the same color. And then I'm going to go in firstly under the eaves where I can see the shadow line and lay that down. There is the super cast shadow across the front face of the temple, and as soon as I lay that down, the whole sketch starts to pop. I really think that the underlayers do all the work and the shadows take all the glory, and I think that that is definitely visible in a case like this. Now I want to push this recessed area backwards, and the way that we do that is to paint the entire area darker. So I'm laying down the darker red in the shadow area, but accentuating the shadow line on the right hand side. Now I'm just going to indicate the shadow that the pillar and the windowsill cast on the wall. And then I'm going to go down the stairs and indicate the shadow of the balustrade on the stairs from top to bottom. This shadow area in the center is quite a lot darker than the shadow on either side, so I'm going to lay down neutral tint in this area, starting quite dark at the top and then blending with water down towards the bottom. I'm always conscious when I'm working on a sketch that if I can find areas in the sketch where I can put a very dark contrast against a light, it really does help the sketch pop. And I can see that as soon as I lay down the shadow at the top of the two arches above the door. I don't want the color that I'm putting into the door to bleed out into the rest of this area, so just make sure that you are confident that it is dry enough, and once it is, you can lay down the shadow for the door. Now I'm going to paint in the shadow that the balustrade casts on the white wall, as well as the shadows made by the statues on the lawn and paving. I know that the shadows often dry lighter than when I put them down, so I'm going to let it dry completely before assessing whether I need to go in any darker. I'm going to work on the rectangles on the face of the temple, keeping in mind that the sun is coming from the top right. I'm going to put shadows on the underside and on the right hand side of each box. Then I will add this shadow cast by the pillar. Now I want to push the shadow darker in the darkest area under the eaves, so I'm mixing up a thicker consistency of my shadow color. I'm going to lay it in first on the right hand side directly under the eaves because that is where the shadow is darker. Then I'm going to lay down some water in the rest of the shadow area because I don't want to fill the whole area with dark shadow. And then I will blend the dark shadow, graduate it out towards the lighter edge of the shadow line. And whilst the paint is still wet, I'm going to push it even darker on the right hand side. And then I will add a bit more shadow on the left hand side under the eaves there. Now I'm going to work on the shadow color behind the pillars on either side of the door. I'm just going to use my darker shadow color and make this area even darker. Now, there's not really a shadow on the stairs in the photograph, but I have decided that I'm going to put one in because I feel that I need a bit more contrast on the steps. I would like to get a bit more contrast in the wall area, so I'm just putting some of the neutral tint into the buff titanium, and I'm just going to make a little bit of a color difference in certain parts of the wall. I feel that the path around the side of the temple goes a little bit nowhere, so I'm just using my pen to finish off the path around the side, and then I'm going to use my buff titanium color to separate the pathway from the grassed area, and then I'm going to enhance the colors on the pathway a little bit. I want to separate the grass from the bushes in the background, so I'm going to lay down another layer of the Serpentine Genuine Grass color. I don't want there to be too stark a difference between the grass and the bushes at the back, so I'm going to blend the line out. I'm looking at this one area where the two contrast colors are the greatest, and I can't resist just pushing it a little bit darker one more time. And there's the finished product. If you came this far in this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, comment and subscribe. And I'm also going to add a click link to the video on the Wat Umang temple if you enjoy sketching temples. Until next time, bye for now.